So over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to provide some tips on how to reduce your risk concerning cyber threats. This isn't a be all and end all, and if you do all of these, then everything's nailed on. I could go on for hours on this subject and various other bits and pieces. So we'll start off with email security, phishing, spam, spoofing, and ways to reduce your exposure. Bogus emails remain one of the largest threats to business outside of the sort of internal staff threats and mistakes. Cyber criminals can send thousands of emails a second to unsuspecting parties. It only takes one person clicking on a link or an attachment to affect a machine and cause disruption to a service or business. The most effective spam phishing email campaigns are run as such. You've got organizations out there who are basically trying to steal your data and either use it fraudulently or use it for other gains. These sorts of spam and phishing emails will usually have a link or an attachment with some form of urgency. And such emails may come from HMRC. Click here to receive your tax rebate. From DHL, your package is ready for collection. From Microsoft, please update your login details. If you click on any of these links, you are giving a cyber criminal another way into your systems. There's a number of ways to reduce the risk of becoming a victim to this type of cybercrime. Look to implement an antivirus application that includes anti-spam filters. For larger organizations, deploy dedicated anti-spam filtering systems that sit outside of your organization's network, ensuring emails are checked before they enter your organization. Spoofed emails that either claim to be sent from someone within your own organization or from a known supplier requesting an urgent invoice to be paid to a different bank account than normal. This type of attack is becoming more common, and payments can range from a few £100s to millions of pounds, which was a reported case for a Premiership football team last year. Either way, these sums have a negative impact on any size of business. There's some simple ways to help reduce this risk. Add a banner to the top of emails that are received from outside your organization, such as the one highlighted in yellow and red on the slide. These alert your staff to the fact that this is actually an external email. Do you trust where this email has come from? Are you happy to open the link or open the attachment or follow the link? Ensure you have some of the other email basics covered. Check your own email records held by your domain name services record holder. As a minimum, this should include a sender policy framework or SPF record. This record tells the receiving email server the valid source address is where the email should have originated from. If you don't have an SPF record for your domain, emails that you send are more likely to be rejected by other people's spam filters. To reduce the risk of emails that appear to be spoofed from someone within inside your organization, add a domain keys identifier record or a DKIM record. This is a mechanism that proves internally and externally that you are who you say you are and that you are sending that email. And then a final step is to add a domain-based message authentication reporting and confirmance or DMARC record. The DMARC record ties the SPF and the DKIM record together, and it basically provides analysis on where emails have been sent from your organization. You may have a server sat down in your basement that's responsible for sending all of your emails. But then if this report says that, well, actually someone from China is also sending emails on your behalf, then that's something that you would need to investigate further. Can
I just ask a question on that, James? So just with regards to this this DMARC is something that's really, really complex, and a lot of organizations might turn around and say, well, you know, where does this sit? Just from a, I guess, from a point of view, is this something that is a responsibility of your outsourced tech team that you'd expect them to know? And you said you did a little bit of research on some of the registrations for today. What were the main findings there?
Yeah, so it's if you're a large organization, then it's something that an internal tech team would pick up, or the person responsible for email. But for sort of smaller organizations where they outsource their IT, then absolutely this is something that the outsourcers can pick up on. There's a handy tool called mxtoolbox.com where you can actually check your own settings for this sort of thing. I did a quick look at the attendees list for today, and for organizations that have got their own domain name rather than registering with a Gmail or a Yahoo account, 20% of the domains didn't have a valid SPF record. So there's a good chance that for those organizations, their emails are not necessarily reaching all of their intended recipients. And 60% of the records didn't have a proper DMARC record set up. So yeah, that's a little bit of sort of information that's pertinent to who we're actually talking to and who's on this call today, because there's definitely people who should review where they are with their own sort of security on that side of things. So two-factor authentication and password hygiene, keeping the keys to your data secure. So two-factor authentication protects against account takeover, fraudulent transactions, unauthorized account access, and account hijacking. In each case, some form of secondary challenge is requested before you can log into a service. So everyone's got a user account and password. These can be compromised, and the idea behind two-factor authentication is when you go and log into your banking account or your email account, it's having something else that, all right, you've got the password, but that could have been bought from the dark web. You then need to validate that you've got a mobile device or some token system that confirms that you are definitely who you are. So breach analysis last year by a National Cybercrime and Security Centre found that over 23 million victims' accounts still used 123456 as their account password. QWERTY's in there with 3.6 million, and as you can see, there's the name Ashley was the highest name, and the highest Premiership club was Liverpool. So many people use the same username and password across multiple accounts. Compromise one account leads to other accounts being compromised. So if someone got your Facebook account and you use that Facebook account for your email, that gets them into another system. From there, they can start requesting password resets on banking accounts. They can create forwarding rules that means emails that you receive are then sent out of your organization without you even knowing it's happening. So to reduce the risk, just go on to the next slide, please. Right, I think we're, yeah, right, okay. So to just go on to the next one, Mel. I think the slides disappeared by lots of it. So yeah, go back a couple more. Right, okay, we'll stay on that one. So to reduce the risk, where possible, switch on two-factor authentication for all your apps and accounts. So this should include stuff like WhatsApp, Facebook, email apps. The chances are your banking apps already got that in place. One reason why it is important to have it on your email, as I've sort of alluded to, is if someone compromises that account, then from there they can set up forwarding rules. We've seen this recently with a with a couple of prospects that we've been working with, where their domain registrar GoDaddy, who was compromised, I think March, April time this year, where millions of user accounts records were stolen. And we've had 2 prospects in the last 3 weeks where GoDaddy's been the ISP. The people haven't used 2-factor authentication for their email accounts. Their email accounts have been hacked. They've then had forwarding rules applied to those accounts, which has enabled either sort of emails to go missing or information to be compromised. So 2FA, wherever you can, switch it on. Ensure your password isn't...
Sorry, there's a quick poll, James. If anybody wants to click on polls and just answer the question, a couple of questions that appear in there, they will be appearing throughout the session. Just, have you ever been phished, and do you have 2FA on all your online accounts, just to get a gauge as to whether or not everybody here has. There's a lot of say online accounts, LinkedIn, your Facebooks. Do you have it on all of them? And if not, sort of why not? Is I guess is one of the questions you can respond to in the chat functionality.
Yeah, thank you. Ensure your password is a minimum of 10 characters. NCSC sort of say 8's an absolute minimum, but we would always sort of, well, go a little bit further than that with sort of 10. Consider using 4 letter words. It's a lot harder to compromise, because if you've got 4 letter words that are random words, such as red lorry, blue lorry, that's not a sort of a well-known phrase. That's not your pet or your mother's maiden name or your date of birth or something like that, which is, people do use that sort of information for passwords, but it is also easily accessible even through sort of Facebook and sort of trawling who you are and your background. Don't use the same password on multiple accounts. I think in the past we've all been guilty of that. I'll put my hand up, and yeah, up until probably 4 or 5 years ago, I probably had 2 passwords that I would rotate around various different accounts and stuff. I now employ a password management tool, and because of that, I have one complex password that I have to remember, but then the rest of them are secured within that application. So there's a few around for that. There's Google Chrome's got one built in, so has Edge. And then there's a few others like LastPass, Dashlane's another good one. But there's quite a few where you can go online and sort of pull recommendations for those. Change default passwords for devices that you purchase as well. So your broadband router that's been supplied by BT or Virgin, stuff like smart TVs, IoT devices, they've all got the ability to report to somewhere else. And it's worth sort of resetting passwords on those things. Protect your perimeter. To better understand the importance of a firewall, first we need to consider the role of the firewall. Whilst it is to stop people getting to your data or being able to infect your machine with malicious code, the firewall does this by inspecting every packet of information that passes through it. Web traffic and content that is downloaded from a website forms a major part of the traffic that needs to be inspected. Over the last 5 years, the volume of traffic passing across the internet has changed from unsecured, so HTTP, to encrypted traffic, HTTPS. The latest figures from Google suggest that over 90% of this traffic, of traffic that is accessed through a Chrome browser, is now HTTPS encrypted, compared to around 50% 5 years ago. This is great news for keeping your end-to-end traffic secure, but not so great if the firewall needs to be able to inspect the traffic. Websites supporting HTTPS, which means they should be secure. So this is where you get the little green padlock in your browser, have been compromised. which allows the unsuspecting victim to download malicious code that has gone on to disrupt business without the traffic being inspected by the firewall. So think of your firewall as your front door into your business. The firewall's job is to create a physical barrier preventing people from accessing your building without permission. Firewalls, like front doors, come in various shapes and sizes, ranging from a basic low-cost entry model to next-generation devices supporting multiple detection features. So a next-generation firewall, which we'll sort of talk more about, could be considered as a solid steel door. The door is a visible deterrent that deters all but the most skilled criminal. If they get through the first door, there might be a porch with a second internal door and then an alarm system to disable. These systems offer a multi-layered approach to securing your property. A next generation firewall works in the same way. If you compromise the first layer of protection, then there are multiple layers of protection behind the first to disable, giving the business time to react. A next generation firewall will also inspect the secure, like HTTPS traffic, and make decisions on whether to allow it into the network or not. So where you have members of staff working from home and connecting to your office to access company data, ensure they're using a VPN or virtual private network. This ensures that data being sent and received is encrypted. So legacy and basic firewalls, these are devices which are typically supplied with your internet connections, such as your Virgin Media Box, your BT Smart Hub. These should be considered as a door with a wooden frame. The lower half's a solid wooden panel, the top half's frosted glass. It'll keep the weather out, but if you wanted to break through, you could do so with a brick. A basic firewall generally doesn't have the same level of the capabilities to inspect HTTPS traffic, which is, as I sort of said, the bulk of traffic that's now out there on the internet. So in instances where you are running a basic firewall, consider doing something where you're running a DNS content filter. And what this will do for you is when you visit a website, before you actually get to the site, it'll do a lookup and determine whether that site is safe to access or not. And in cases where a site has been compromised or isn't safe, it will alert you before you try and connect to it. The next point to consider is types of traffic that is allowed to enter your network. If you have an email server at your office that is set up to allow inbound emails to be received direct to your organization's server, this traffic needs to pass through the firewall. And we would always recommend that your traffic goes through a spam filter, and then only that spam filter is allowed to talk to the server, which reduces your threat levels. With COVID and the rush for organizations to get their staff working from home, we have seen it where organizations have enabled something called remote desktop protocol. This basically allows anyone on the internet to connect directly to your internal servers. This threat has increased by 37% alone this year with attacks that have used this vector. If you need to be able to access servers from remote locations or need to use remote desktop, then what we would always recommend is you have people VPNing into the organization, and then from there they access the servers using RDP. It just means that you're opening less ports up to the internet. Ultimately, the less ports you open up, the safer your organization is.
James, can I just ask you a quick question on that? So just with regards to accessing servers and networks, do you find that with a lot of organizations, especially, we've got a lot of small organizations registered, that a lot of this is, I suppose, alleviated by the use of the cloud-based collaboration platforms and therefore not as much of an issue? Or, is there a need for anybody to be remoting on? And also, again, I guess just feedback as to the commonality of these threats amongst small businesses.
Yeah, and I think it depends on on how the organisation works. It's if you've got a manufacturing organisation that may have maybe a dozen or more sort of members of staff, then they may have that requirement to access internal systems, because they may have like their account systems and their CAD systems may not be online systems. And we see a real mix of this, where an organisation is a young organisation and they are predominantly cloud based, so they'll be using sort of Office 365, and they might be using Zero and sort of Microsoft SharePoint and OneDrive. They may just have a basic firewall that's sort of software based and built into the antivirus, or just sort of relying on some of the other technologies. But certainly the larger sort of SMEs would normally have some sort of firewalls and some connectivity into an organization.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the points that I raised earlier then, just on the chat, if anybody saw it, is that there's been a spike of end users turning off their firewall. Why they feel they need to turn off their firewall on their Windows PCs is an unknown, but there has been a spike in it. And again, that's things to be mindful of, that the traffic between them obviously going on to the cloud-based platforms and systems is potentially then vulnerable. So that's just the sort of thing you might want to look at from a smaller business perspective. I think there was a couple of in there as well, just on the 2FA backup really as well, that was just asking, are there any threats in terms of accessing backup if you lose your 2FA? And my viewpoint on this would always have a backup to your 2FA. So if you're using Google Authenticate, maybe have it on your iPad as well as your iPhone, but just obviously you then have to think of the security of those devices. Again.
And I think there's other bits around there as well. It's normally when you set up a 2FA system, there'll normally be some sort of other system that you can use to, if you need to recover your passwords. So with sort of Microsoft, they've got there's normally two ways of if you're using like the Microsoft Authenticator app, you can either authenticate against a mobile number or an email address. So 2FA, if you're using like the 2FA and sort of password tools, then most of those have a secondary way that you can access your data if things go pear-shaped.
I think there's potentially going to be a conversation after this about how secure texts are for 2FA, but we can pick that up at the end if that's okay. Thank you, James.
Yeah, okay. So antivirus and keeping software up to date. New cyber threats are being created all the time. Wherever possible, ensure your IT systems have antivirus applications installed. Well-known antivirus vendors include Avast, AVG, ESEX, Bursky, McAfee, Sophos, and there are other vendors out there as well. Most of the vendor products will offer similar sort of core feature sets. From a business perspective, find a vendor that covers all the equipment that your organization runs, such as Windows-based computers, Android tablets, smartphones, Apple iOS devices. So Android and Apple devices are less obvious devices to protect, and are less publicized for being infected. However, it does happen. There have been cases where mobiles have been infected with malware and data stolen. In some cases, the actual sort of malware is downloaded straight from Google App Store. Apple are a lot tighter on this because of the way that they prevent you from downloading unsecurity signed apps unless you sort of jailbreak your phone. So keeping software up to date. Due to the size and complexity of operating systems and applications, it isn't always possible to test every line of code before it's released into production. When issues arise, the vendors will release a software update to enable businesses to try and keep on top of their own patch management. Microsoft release all of their updates on Patch Tuesday. Without fail, on the second Tuesday of the month, Microsoft will release upwards of 30 to 40 patches. So which are security fixes and security patches and bug fixes for their products. The patches keep your software working, but they also fix security holes that have been exposed. Usually you'll also find that these new patches will also generate new bugs which then need patching, and the cycle never ends. So who remembers WannaCry? WannaCry was a ransomware infection that infected large parts of the NHS IT systems in 2017. The majority of the machines that were infected were running versions of Microsoft Windows that was still supported and still being patched. It was just a case that the software hadn't been updated, allowing the bug to exploit the computers that were infected. So we would always recommend sort of patching machines within 14 days of release of any updates. If you're a Cyber Essentials accredited organisation and have machines running unsupported software, such as those listed on the slide, you're likely to fail your next Cyber Essentials renewal, as they're really sort of tightening up on that side of things. And you may also find that your cyber insurance isn't validated anymore because you're running software that's X numbers of years out of date, that hasn't been updated or patched. There's bugs that are known, that are out there, and if you get hit with one of those bugs, then you might be on your own on that one. So we're nearly there. So backup and recovery, when all else fails, being confident you can recover from a disaster. So far, everything I've talked about has been about managing cyber risk. However, should a disaster occur, such as cyber, fire, flood, hardware failure, having a recovery strategy is equally important. To implement a To implement a successful recovery strategy, you need to understand the following. What data is critical to your business to enable it to run, such as emails, your documents, your databases, which may be used for accounting systems or for product planning or distributing of services. Where is the data being held? File and email servers on premise, hosted Sage 50, something sat on an accountant's PC, in Google G Suite or Microsoft 365. All of these locations have one thing in common. Unless you've put a system in place, they are not being backed up. Microsoft and Google's stance on data that's held in their data centers, such as G Suite and Office 365, your data is your responsibility. What's your recovery time objective? Realistically, how long can you be without your data before it has a negative impact on your business? A few hours, a few days? What is your recovery point objective? How much data can you afford to lose without data loss having a negative impact on your business? So if you're a bank, if you were without transactions from a few seconds prior to a disaster, then that may have a massive impact on your business. If you're, I don't know, if you're a builder or a plumber, and you lose emails from the last 24 hours, that's probably not going to cause you too many issues, but it's still something to understand. Once you have all this information, you can deploy a backup solution. The rule of thumb for securing your data is follow the 3-2-1 rule. Simply put, keep at least 3 copies of your data, primary working copy and 2 backup copies. Use 2 different media types for backup, such as tape, removable storage or NAS storage. Have at least 1 off-site copy, a backup to a cloud, or taking removable media off-site, such as tape or RDX devices. Make sure those devices are encrypted. Finally, ensure that you document any Finally, ensure you've a disaster recovery plan that you can follow, which you test at least once a year, or if there's any significant changes within your environment. So, final slide. So the human touch. This presentation has covered what we would consider to be some of the main points around IT data security. As I said at the start, this is by no means a definitive list, and there are numerous other steps that should be taken that we've not covered today. When we don't get it right through staff awareness training or hardware software solutions, having the right cyber insurance is a final safety net for your business. And with that, I would like to hand over to Neil.